It was the kind of case that made even Sherlock Holmes raise an eyebrow. A vault emptied without a key, no footprints, no damage, and no suspects. How do you rob a vault without ever unlocking it? You're listening to The Detective Files, where every shadow hides a secret, and every case demands a brilliant mind. Starring Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in their most chilling investigations yet. It was one of those bleak December mornings in London when the fog had a texture to it, thick, woolen and persistent, muffling sound and smudging even the gas lamps into sleepy halos. I had just finished reading aloud a particularly ghastly account of a factory fire from the times when Holmes, who had been leaning with unnatural stillness against the windowpane, turned to me with that glint in his eye I had come to associate with the scent of mystery. "There's a knock coming in precisely 10 seconds, Watson." I lowered my newspaper. "How do you know it's not a milkman?" He smiled faintly, because only someone in urgent need would trudge through a fog this dense, and a milkman would be far too preoccupied saving his trousers from mud. Holmes had already opened the door before Mrs. Hudson could shuffle in with her apron flapping. A man entered, tall, with a stiff moustache, smart grey overcoat, and a bowler hat. "He clutched like it owed him money, Mr. Holmes," he said quickly. "I am Reginald Caversham, manager at Halberd Bank, and I believe we've had an impossible robbery." Now that, I thought, was a good beginning. Holmes gestured to the chair by the fire. "Please sit, Mr. Caversham, and kindly explain how a vault might be robbed without being opened." Caversham blinked. "That's just it, sir. The vault was found, sealed, untouched. The lock has not been tampered with. The key is still in its guarded compartment, and yet—" He leaned forward, voice cracking. 123 bearer bonds worth nearly £500,000 are gone." There was a long pause in the room. Even the fireplace seemed to withhold its crackle in anticipation. "Gone?" I asked. "But you said the vault was unopened." "I did," he replied, "because it was. The security sigil stamped into the wax over the keyhole was still intact. No one broke the seal, no one removed the key. And yet the bonds are not inside." Quote. Holmes gave a low hum. The sound he made when a puzzle wasn't just intriguing, it was impossible. "No break-in?" he asked. "None. No false wall, false floor, false register. Every inch examined. No vanishing act by the night watchman. He was chained to the time clock and accounted for every half hour." Holmes stood abruptly and fetched his coat. "Watson," he said, grabbing his hat, "bring your revolver. I rather think this is going to be a very peculiar morning." The Halberd Bank sat like a stubborn bulldog at the corner of Leadenhall Street and Ironmonger Lane. Thick stone walls, reinforced shutters, and a reputation for being as impenetrable as its iron-veined name suggested. By the time we arrived, the fog had thickened like curdled milk. Even the carriages seemed to clop more quietly than usual. Caversham led us through the heavy brass doors, where 2 grim-faced constables flanked the vestibule. Inside, the marble floors gleamed beneath ornate chandeliers, a stark contrast to the tension that hung over the place like a bad debt. We were soon escorted down a short corridor that descended into the belly of the building, a locked iron gate, a winding stone stair, and finally a heavy door with 4 separate locks. Caversham turned to Holmes. "This vault is our most secure unit. Only I and the chairman have access to the primary key. That key is still in the control box." Holmes crouched near the steel vault door. He withdrew a jeweler's glass and leaned close to the keyhole, inspecting the crimson wax seal with the precision of a surgeon unbroken. He murmured. "Exactly. Caversham said that seal was placed yesterday at 6 p.m., as per routine. It was intact when I arrived this morning." Watson and I exchanged a glance. Holmes stood. "And when was the missing inventory last confirmed?" "Yesterday afternoon. All 123 bearer bonds were counted and accounted for by both myself and our senior vault clerk." "May I?" Holmes gestured to the door. Of course Caversham opened a secured side panel, where the key still rested, untouched, in a velvet-lined drawer. He retrieved it, placed it into the lock, and twisted. With a low mechanical groan, the vault door shuddered open. We stepped inside. The room was chilly and dim, lit only by a gas lantern on a hook near the door. Steel shelves lined the walls, some empty, some with small locked boxes, others with stacks of ledgers. A solitary cabinet in the center stood open, utterly, completely empty. Holmes moved toward it with measured calm. He crouched and inspected the wood grain, the base of the shelf and the hinges. No signs of forced entry, he muttered. Watson stepped beside him. Could a clerk have taken the bonds before the seal was applied? Caversham shook his head. Impossible. The seal is always the final act. Both myself and the clerk signed the register, applied the seal together, then locked the vault. Quote. Holmes stood silently for a long moment, his fingers steepled before his lips. Then he turned and examined the air vents, the ceiling corners, even the gaps between the floor tiles. Finally he spoke. Has this vault ever been used to store anything else? Prior to the bonds, Caversham frowned. Yes, it held foreign currency last year. Why? Holmes didn't answer. Instead, he knelt once more beside the empty cabinet and began to knock. Not randomly, but rhythmically, as though trying to find the heartbeat of a hollow wall. Watson leaned toward me. Do you hear it? I did. The fifth knock had a different tone. Holmes pressed his palm against the rear panel. This cabinet, he said quietly, is not as loyal to the wall as it pretends to be. Holmes ran a finger slowly along the back panel of the cabinet, his brow furrowed. This isn't fixed, he said under his breath. There's a seam here, thin, nearly invisible. Watson stepped forward. A false back. Not false, Holmes replied, deceptively real. With a small blade from his coat pocket he pressed into the corner joint and pried gently. The panel gave with a quiet click. The section swung open, revealing a hollow compartment behind it. Inside were tiny grooves etched into the side walls, likely where the bonds had been nestled in stacks. But now, nothing. Holmes turned to Caversham. Did anyone else have access to this vault within the last 2 days? No, he said firmly. Only myself, the vault clerk, and the night watchman. And the seal proves the vault wasn't opened since it was locked. And this compartment, Holmes asked, was it part of the official inventory? Caversham hesitated. It was known, but unused. A legacy feature from decades ago, when the cabinet was repurposed. No one pays attention to it anymore. Someone did, Holmes muttered. And they knew exactly how to exploit it. Watson asked what we were all thinking. But how did they get inside the vault? The seal was untouched. The door was locked. Holmes stood, staring at the ceiling. Perhaps they were never outside to begin with. I felt a chill run up my spine. Someone inside the vault overnight, I said. That would mean that the thief was locked in with the bonds, Holmes said, and walked out with them the moment the vault was next opened. Watson's eyes narrowed. That would make the thief a sleeper, precisely. Holmes turned to the guard post stationed just beyond the lower corridor. How many staff have access to this corridor? He asked. Only 2 guards and the vault clerk, came the reply. Have either of the guards been replaced recently? A stand-in from the agency came in yesterday morning. Barnes. First day on the job. Where is he now? Left his shift at 6 this morning? Holmes nodded sharply. We'll need his address immediately. Caversham flinched. Are you suggesting the thief simply walked out the front door disguised as a guard? No, Holmes replied. I'm suggesting he walked out disguised as a man no one would question, because he walked out with the vault manager himself. There was a long pause before Caversham spoke again. But I came alone. Holmes didn't blink. Did you? We were back at Baker Street within the hour. The fog still clinging to the streets like cobwebs. Holmes barely removed his coat before diving into correspondence, rummaging through his Rolodex of agents, informants, and obscure watch lists. His fingers moved with impatience, which, in Holmesian terms, meant the case had touched something primal in him. Watson, he said without looking up. Write down the name. Edwin Barnes. Cross-check with every London employment agency specializing in security rotation. I fetched the ledger. Is it your belief that Barnes was not an actual agency hire? I asked. Holmes finally turned, fingers steepled under his chin. My belief, he said coolly, is that Edwin Barnes does not exist, at least not as the man who walked into that vault corridor yesterday, and knocked at the door. This time it wasn't predicted. Lestrade stepped in with his usual half-annoyed, half-amused expression. I heard about your little vault conundrum, Holmes. Thought I'd see what mess you were about to blame on Scotland Yard this time. Holmes ignored the jab. Lestrade, we need access to agency records, private guard rotations, and recent photographs of every person who entered Halberd Bank in the last 72 hours. Lestrade raised an eyebrow. And you think I can produce that on a Tuesday? Holmes stood. You'll do better than that. You'll also bring me the street surveillance sketches from Ironmonger Lane. Particularly the moments between 6:05 and 6:15 a.m. this morning. Lestrade folded his arms. That's oddly specific. Holmes was already pacing. That's when the bonds walked out the door. Watson interjected. Do you believe the impersonator actually changed clothes inside the bank? Indeed, Holmes said the shift guard's uniform, the timing of Caversham's departure, and the exact moment the seal was due to be opened, all were part of a single clockwork operation. He stopped at the fireplace. It was a performance. Lestrade gave a grunt. Very well, I'll shake down the agencies, but if this turns out to be another case of misfiled inventories and overactive violinists. Holmes looked up, dead serious. Then I shall eat my deerstalker hat. Lestrade. Watson chuckled quietly with salt. Holmes didn't smile. By midday Lestrade returned with a file of scribbled notes, some partially soaked by the rain, and a half-chewed pencil wedged behind one ear. Barnes was hired through Walcott and Green, he announced, dropping the folder on our table. They received the request yesterday morning from Halberd Bank's admin line. All standard, except. He flipped to a copy of the requisition slip. There's no signature, no official seal. Just a name typed in plain letters, R. Caversham. Holmes frowned. Forgery. Possibly, said Lestrade. We've confirmed that Caversham never sent such a request. His office line was unused that entire morning. Watson exhaled. So the thief forged the bank manager's name, hired himself into the bank, hid overnight in the vault, and walked out, dressed as a guard, once the seal was officially broken. Holmes smiled faintly, and left not a single trace. Rather elegant, don't you think? Lestrade wasn't amused. There's more. We obtained one sketch from a street watchman. Just after 6 o'clock this morning, a man in a guard's coat exited the bank, carrying what looked like a parcel wrapped in brown cloth. Was his face visible? Barely. Cap pulled low, but the artist remembered one detail. The man limped slightly. Left foot dragged. Holmes' eyes flickered. Drag patterns, he whispered. Cobblestone, wet with fog. He turned to Watson. Your boots, Watson. Quickly Watson stared. Now, 5 minutes later, we were at the eastern edge of Ironmonger Lane. The fog had begun to lift, revealing slick paving stones glinting beneath afternoon haze. Holmes dropped to one knee and began scanning the curb. There, he muttered, pointing to a series of faint smudges. The heel digs in deeper on the left. Forward thrust impaired. Likely compensating for a weak tendon. Lestrade raised an eyebrow. You're reading all that from dirt. Holmes stood. Not dirt. Truth. We followed the trail for a block, where it abruptly stopped near a carriage stand. Holmes turned to the nearby shopkeeper. Did you see a man in uniform take a cab this morning? The shopkeeper, a wiry fellow with ash on his collar, nodded. Aye. Tall lad, bit of a limp. Took a hansom heading toward Shadwell. Seemed in a hurry. Holmes's voice dropped. Then so are we. The cab clattered toward Shadwell, its iron-rimmed wheels slicing through puddles like razors. Holmes remained silent, eyes fixed on the blur of London slipping past the window. Watson and I sat opposite. The only sound, the rhythmic clop of the horse and the distant cry of gulls near the Thames. By the time we reached the East End, the fog had thinned into drizzle. The air was heavy with salt and soot, a place where secrets fermented in every alley. Lestrade stepped out first, adjusting his collar. So what are we looking for exactly? Holmes gestured toward a row of decaying tenements. We're looking for a man too clever to carry paper money through the streets and too injured to vanish quickly. He led us down a narrow passage between warehouses until we reached a crooked row house with a flaking green door. A rusted placard read, Mrs. Webley, rooms to let. Holmes knocked. A gaunt, sallow woman with a shawl opened the door. We're looking for a man who arrived early this morning, Holmes said, showing her a half-finished sketch Lestrade had brought from the street watchman. Tall. Limping. Guard's coat. Mrs. Webley squinted. He's upstairs. Said he was injured unloading cargo. Paid in full. Haven't heard a peep since. Quote. Holmes nodded to Lestrade quietly. We ascended the narrow stairwell. At the third door, Holmes paused. He pressed his ear to the panel. Silence. He motioned to Watson, who readied his revolver. Then, with a burst of speed that startled even Lestrade, Holmes kicked the door open. The room was bare save for a cot, a table, and a battered wardrobe. But it was the open window that drew our eyes, and the knotted bedsheets hanging from the sill. Damn it, Lestrade growled, rushing to the ledge. He's gone. Holmes walked calmly to the wardrobe, inspecting the inner lining. No bond certificates, he said. He took everything. Watson examined the sheets. He must have climbed down to the alley. Holmes turned, lifting a scrap of parchment from the floor. He held it to the light, but he left something behind. It was a note, 5 words, scribbled in sharp handwriting. Better luck next time. Holmes. Watson let out a low whistle. Lestrade grunted. He knows you. Holmes tucked the note into his coat pocket. He knows me, or he's studying me. Either way, we're no longer chasing a thief. He turned toward the door. We're in a duel now. We returned to Baker Street well past dusk. The lamps outside flickered like weary sentinels, and Holmes said little for the better part of an hour. He smoked in silence, gaze lost in the fireplace, the criminal's parting note resting on the mantel, like a glove thrown before a duel. Watson poured 2 cups of tea and placed one near Holmes. So, he said cautiously, we're dealing with a man who not only knew how to beat the bank's security, but how to get under your skin. Holmes took the cup without looking up. More than that, Watson. He anticipated my involvement, knew the vault's procedures, predicted the seal inspection, and crafted an exit route clever enough to elude 3 professionals. Lestrade sat at the desk, flipping the note between his fingers. We've circulated his sketch to every port authority. If he's fleeing the country, we'll know by morning. Holmes tapped his fingers once, twice, then rose abruptly. No, he's not leaving. Lestrade raised a brow. Why not? Because he wants me to chase him. He moved to the table, retrieving a stack of bank ledgers Caversham had lent us earlier. He flipped through them quickly. Think about the arrogance of it. He writes a message. He vanishes just before we arrive. He even forges a false identity for a single day's worth of employment. Not for money, but for challenge. He paused. This wasn't just a theft. It was a test. Watson exhaled. A thief with an ego. Holmes gave a tight nod or a message. That he exists. That he's thinking. And he wants to play. He tapped the ledger. Watson, look here. Each bearer bond has a serial number and registry timestamp. The thief took only those printed between February and May of last year. Lestrade blinked. Why would that matter? Because, Holmes said, those particular bonds were printed by a different contractor. Dawson and Briggs before the bank transitioned to Treadmore Press. Watson's brow furrowed. Are you suggesting the thief has inside knowledge of the printing history? Holmes narrowed his eyes. I'm suggesting he once worked for them, and that this was personal. By the following morning, Holmes and I were seated in a cluttered workshop in Lambeth, surrounded by the scent of ink, parchment dust, and the heavy clang of old printing presses. Dawson and Briggs was no longer in operation. Its remnants had been sold off years ago, but one of the original partners, a stoop-backed gentleman named Arthur Briggs, still lived above the old shop. I'm retired, Mr. Holmes, the man said gruffly, sipping weak tea. But yes, we printed bearer bonds for Halberd Bank until May of last year. Shifted to a new supplier after our press malfunctioned. Holmes leaned forward. Did you lose any employees around that time? Perhaps one let go. Briggs nodded, expression darkening. One apprentice. Sharp boy, bit of a loner. Quiet, but too clever for his own good name. Victor Merrin. Caught him duplicating bond paper. Trying to replicate watermark designs after hours. Fired him on the spot. Watson looked up. Was he arrested? No. He disappeared before we could report it. Took his wages. Vanished overnight. I suspected he was running some scheme, but nothing ever came of it. Holmes stood slowly, as if a gear had locked into place in his mind. Merrin. He repeated. That's our phantom. Quotes. Briggs continued. He was obsessed with mechanical puzzles. Modified his own press for speed and silence. Even built secret compartments in his workbench. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Where was he living at the time? Briggs scratched his temple. Rented a back flat in Whitechapel near the old tannery. Filthy place. Holmes was already moving toward the door. Then that's where we go next. Watson caught up beside him. Do you truly believe Merrin's the one? He forged bank records, infiltrated the vault, vanished into the fog, and left me a note with 5 words that match his linguistic style perfectly. Style, sharp ends, clipped vowels, the absence of contractions. It's not what he said. It's how he said it. Watson smiled. You're profiling his handwriting now. Holmes didn't return the smile. I'm profiling his mind. Whitechapel had never looked darker. The streets here felt older than the city itself, crumbling brick, twisted alleys, and the smell of damp coal clinging to everything. The kind of place where memories went to rot. Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade moved through the narrowing passages with purpose. They stopped at a dilapidated structure behind an abandoned tannery, its crooked roof and peeling shutters giving it the appearance of a house trying to collapse inward. "Flat 3, Holmes murmured. "Rear courtyard." Watson gripped the revolver beneath his coat. "If Merrin's in there, he'll know we're coming." Holmes smiled faintly. "Let's hope so." The door was unlocked. No resistance. Only a long creaking groan as Lestrade pushed it open. The scent hit us first. Stale ink, oil, and something sharper beneath it. The flat was dim. Dust danced in the rays of light that broke through boarded windows. On one wall was a sprawling corkboard filled with sketches of vault layouts, wax seals, pressure locks, and shift timetables. A string of pins connected everything like a web. Watson muttered. "He's been planning this for months." Holmes said nothing. He moved past the table, where scraps of imitation bond paper were laid out in rows. Test prints, watermark studies, chemical stains. But what drew his eye was a map spread across the back wall, a blueprint of Halberd Bank. Tiny red markings traced Merrin's entire route through the building, including escape plans. Lestrade lifted a small notebook from the floor. Its leather cover bore a scratched monogram. "VM. Empty," he said. Pages ripped out. Holmes turned toward the window. "He's close." "How do you know?" asked Watson. Holmes knelt beside the fireplace. There, beside the ashes, sat a still warm cup of tea. "He was here less than 20 minutes ago." Watson felt his skin crawl. "Then, where is he now?" Holmes turned his gaze upward. The ceiling, no creaks, no dust movement, no noise. He didn't go up. And he didn't pass us. Which means... He tapped his cane against the floorboards. He went down, a faint echo. Holmes swept the rug aside, revealing a brass ring embedded in the wood, a hatch. A ladder beneath, swallowed by darkness. Lestrade stepped forward. "We'll go together." Holmes drew his revolver. "Number I go first." Holmes descended into the hatch with slow precision, revolver in one hand, lantern in the other. The ladder creaked under his weight, each step swallowed into a narrow tunnel of brick and earth. I followed next, Lestrade close behind. The passage beneath the Whitechapel flat was tighter than a coal chute, barely enough for one man to walk upright. The walls sweated with old damp, and the air was dense with mold and cold iron. We moved cautiously, the light from Holmes's lantern flickering across roots dangling like ghost fingers. After nearly 30 paces, the tunnel opened into a hidden chamber, perhaps once a root cellar. Now it looked like the heart of the operation. Stacks of brown-wrapped parcels lay along one wall, sealed with wax. A makeshift printing station occupied the other, smaller than a press, but clearly built for forging. On the far table sat a crate labeled Thames Freight Company. Holmes inspected one of the parcels. He slit the wax and unrolled it. "Bearer bonds," he confirmed. "Nearly all of them." Lestrade whistled. "He never left the country. He never even planned to." "He was storing them," Holmes said, waiting for the storm to pass. "And when it did, he'd sell them quietly, bit by bit." Quote, I turned to the crate. "What about this?" Holmes lifted the lid. Inside were new disguises, coats, badges, forged identification cards for several London banks, including Halberd and Penrith Union. "Watson said it first. He's planning another job." Holmes nodded. Or was a sound behind us. "Quick." Holmes turned, revolver raised. But no one was there. Then, a slow clap echoed from the shadows. From behind a column stepped a tall figure, face sharp, hair slick, dressed not like a criminal, but a man of precise taste. He had the look of someone who preferred ink to blood. "Bravo, Mr. Holmes," said Victor Merrin. "I expected you sooner." Merrin's slow clap stopped as he stepped fully into the lantern light. His posture was relaxed, too relaxed, for a man standing in a sealed cellar before 3 armed men. Holmes didn't lower his revolver. "You took a great risk, Mr. Merrin," The forger offered a half-smile. All art demands risk. You of all people must appreciate that Lestrade barked. You're cornered. No exit, no reinforcements, no deal. Merrin raised a brow. No exit? Are you certain? Holmes interrupted, voice calm. This chamber has one entrance. We followed your trail. Your deception was good, but not perfect. Merrin chuckled, then gestured toward the wall behind him. Would it disappoint you to know, Mr. Holmes, that this vault you've so carefully uncovered isn't even the original one? Watson whispered. What does he mean? Merrin leaned casually against a support beam. I created 2 cells, 2 cache sites. One filled with fakes, one with the real bombs. I've been watching you since yesterday, from across rooftops, from alley shadows. This place? It's the theater, Holmes. The stage. I wanted you to find it. He tapped the crate beside him. These are worthless. Paste and stamped ink. Good enough to fool a constable, not you. Quote. Holmes remained silent, but his gun hand tightened. Watson stepped forward. Then where are the real bonds? Merrin smiled, already delivered. By hand. 2 days ago. The moment the vault was sealed, I knew your clock had started. I simply stayed behind to admire the play. Lestrade lunged forward. You're lying. Merrin didn't move. Am I? He reached into his coat, slowly, and tossed something toward Holmes. It landed with a soft clink. It was a silver seal stamp. The exact one used by Halberd Bank on its keyhole wax. I had to make one of my own, Merrin said, to make sure the seal looked undisturbed. A small act of mimicry, and the vault remained innocent. Holmes knelt, lifted the stamp, and examined the fine engraving. Perfect. Flawless. You're a craftsman, Holmes muttered. Wasted in crime. Merrin gave a light bow, perhaps. But crime has better audiences. Then, in a single startling motion, Merrin pulled a hidden lever embedded in the beam. The entire far wall lurched. A section of bricks retracted, a hidden tunnel behind. Stop him! Lestrade shouted. But Merrin was already sprinting into the dark. Merrin disappeared into the dark like a wisp of ink soaked into parchment. Holmes gave chase without a word. No commands, no hesitation, just the sharp rhythm of footsteps echoing down the tunnel. Watson and Lestrade followed, revolvers drawn. The tunnel twisted, a forgotten sewer line by the smell, every turn tighter, slicker, more dangerous. We ran for nearly 3 minutes, lantern bobbing, boots splashing in shallow muck, until Holmes suddenly raised a hand. Stop, he whispered. Up ahead, a faint scrape. Breathing. The silhouette of Merrin paused at the far end, outlined by a thin line of light above what looked like a storm drain cover. He was almost out. Holmes stepped forward. You've nowhere else to run, Merrin. The thief didn't look back. I never intended to run forever. He reached the grate, pushed it open. Moonlight spilled down, and began to climb. Lestrade raised his weapon. Don't, Holmes said. He wants you to fire. Watson blinked. Why? Because if he's shot, he dies a myth. But if we catch him... He didn't finish the thought. Above, Merrin vanished into the night air. We emerged moments later in the courtyard behind a butcher's row in Stepney. Merrin was gone. Just the sound of wind, the distant creak of signs, and the echo of a man who had planned his vanishing act down to the final breath. Holmes stood in silence for a long while. Lestrade muttered, We lost him. Holmes turned toward us, eyes not angry, but intrigued. No, he said softly. We met him. Watson stepped closer. Do you think he'll strike again? Holmes finally allowed himself the faintest smile. Oh, he already has. This wasn't the beginning of a case, Watson. He pocketed the forged silver seal. It was the first chapter of a longer story, and with that he turned and walked off into the rising fog of Stepney, the last seal broken, the last step unfinished, and the game perhaps only just beginning. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe. More chilling cases, more brilliant deductions, only on The Detective Files.